Hi, it's me again, and we're going to talk a little more about the same topic as last time because I feel like I left a couple things untouched. And first off, we're going to go to current events because guess what? Just yesterday, there was a news item from Poland that is pertinent to the topic of castration. They have just passed a law with mandatory castration. From the BBC, Poland castration law takes effect. A Polish law that can force some rapists and pedophiles to undergo chemical castration has come into effect. The legislation passed by Polish MPs last September applies to men who rape children or immediate family members. Though it seems troubling at first, I think, probably to most of us, just because we have sort of a gory picture of someone getting their Johnson cut off with a samurai sword or something from the movies or whatever. This is a chemical procedure, and also we should ask if certain rights are taken away from immoral behavior, rights such as, mobility and you're stuck in prison or whatever. Can reproductive rights be taken away through immoral behavior? I don't know. If you see castration though as a punishment, like as in a penal sense though, that does seem rather harsh and possibly wrong. If you look at it more as a treatment or a therapy to change the person so they don't reoffend, to protect society, then possibly that's okay. I really glad it's not my call though. And that leads me to another topic which is related but not exactly the same, and that's related to the monks and nuns thing, because it's asceticism and the relation of asceticism to castration. So it is different because castration is sort of the removal of the sex drive, whereas asceticism is sort of fighting with it and subjugating it, not. So the presence of it makes for a continued tension, whereas the eunuch is somebody who does not experience the sex drive at all. But asceticism is a really interesting topic in the realm of religion. At first, the idea of asceticism seems really counter to the way we want to see the world. We want to engage the world. We want to love life, etc. Living by this excessive discipline and sort of self-flagellation, self-abnegation does not seem in line with the idea of enjoying life, with living life to the fullest. But I think if we look at it closer, there's maybe something to be learned there. And I know in my teenage years, dabbled a little bit in asceticism. I would fast. I would spend time in seclusion. I would go without speaking for several days, things like that, thinking that it would sort of heighten my spiritual sense, that it would bring me closer to God and things like that. My experience with that was a little mixed, where I felt ultimately rather disappointed in that it was sort of it never produced good enough results. Though I wonder if perhaps I would have starved myself a little longer and hallucinated a little bit, maybe I would have had different feelings about it. But be that as it may, it's not something that really draws me right now. But the value of it, I think, is in that of priorities. So, in a sense, when you set aside things that are important for something that you consider more important. So, for example, food. If you set aside food to focus on your spirit for several days, you remove a large part of your daily routine. If you're not eating and if you're trying not to think about food, you have that much more time to think about whatever it is you are trying to think about, be it God or your soul or something like that. Now, think about that in terms of monastic vows. You're setting aside a life, you're setting aside career, you're setting aside wealth, you're setting aside aspirations of marriage and family to commit your life to one thing. And there is something beautiful about that. There is something fascinating about that that doesn't seem to negate our human, experience and negate engaging with the world. It's in fact seems like a deeper way to really focus and engage. But being that being said, um, there is a darker side to it as well. That would be probably what Nietzsche would criticize as sort of the aesthetic ideal, which would be counter to, allowing yourself to fully engage with life. And it also seems like a possible false dichotomy to say that you will come closer to God by denying yourself and denying um, innate things such as food, pleasure, relationships, aspirations, ambitions, um, may actually be a red herring. It may not lead you closer to God at all. Judaism is often characterized as being against asceticism, as trying to affirm the physical world, trying to elevate the physical world to the spiritual, rather than that sort of Platonic dichotomy of spirit versus flesh, where the spirit must be subjugated. The flesh must be subjugated unto the spirit. The Jewish idea is more to elevate the flesh to the level of the spirit. And I'll just read one chunk here from Wikipedia. Both the term asceticism and the idea which the term expresses are of non-Jewish origin and implication. Judaism is of a temper which is fatal to asceticism. The history of Judaism and the Jews is, on the whole, free from ascetic aspirations. Fundamental to the teachings of Judaism is the thought that the world is good. Pessimism has no stand ground. Life is not under the curse. The doctrine of original sin, the depravity of man, has never had a foothold within the theology of the synagogue. It never held sway over the mind and the religious imaginations of the Jews. In consequence of this, the body and the flesh were never regarded by them as contaminated, and the appetites and passions were not suspected of being rooted in evil. Now, this is what you'll usually hear, and it's more or less true, though it's being expressed a little more monolithically than is actually the case. There were definitely some famous rabbis who really led austere lives, and Jewish mystics, who would have definitely qualified as ascetics. But that being said, I remember there's a famous story about a Hasidic story, which is pretty funny, about some Talmudim, some students of a tzaddik, or a righteous man, who on Friday night hid under his bed, knowing that Friday night is a mitzvah, it's a good deed to deliver your conjugal rights on that night, because they wanted to learn from the tzaddik how best to make love. And that kind of expresses the ideals of, well, supposedly the ideals of Hasidic philosophy and all that. Now, that's true, but I won't go as far as the Wikipedia article goes, because there are definitely, some very austere rabbis. I think Yosef Karo, who codified the Shulchan Aruch, is the kind of guy who would get up at midnight and put his feet in ice water and roll in the snow and wear a hair shirt and all that. So you can't say there's no asceticism in Judaism.